Welcome to the Ephesiology podcast, a podcast dedicated to the study of the early Christian movement and its implications for the church today. As always, we are joined by Michael, our resident ecclesiologist. We have Matt Till down in Miami, Florida, and I say down because I am Andrew Johnson up in Victoria, British Columbia. And today we have a super exciting podcast ahead of us because we have with us Dr. Wes Watkins, formerly Warwick Farah. He is the editor of Motus Dei and co-editor of Margins of Islam. He is an adjunct professor at the Arab Baptist Theological Seminary, and as a missiologist with One Collective, Wes facilitates the Motus Dei network and is a researcher at the Oxford Center for Mission Studies. Wes, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ephesiology podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's nice to be with you.
Okay, Wes, I just gave the blurb, all the things that you're doing, all the very scholarly, smart things. Let's make you real, because you are a real person. What are things that your friends or your family know about
being
you?
Smart with not being real?
Okay, that's fair.
Are we making
that's
that
fair.
association
I will.
Here?
Let's just say that sometimes academics lead with titles, and you don't know anything about them. That's all I'm saying. All
right.
Right. So don't.
I think there's more to that. I think there's more to that, but we'll give them. We'll extend the grace.
Well,
That's fine. That's
first
fine.
thing I need to clear up is that I'm not an academic. I mean, I do academics, but only because I'm a really externally motivated learner. So when I have somebody telling me I need to put in papers and stuff, then I study and I read, and so that's why I'm on my 4th degree right now.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't have a doctor in front of your name and not claim to be an academic. You can't go for your 4th degree, your 3rd degree, your 2nd degree without that. So, Wes, I call some BS. Okay. What are things that your family and friends know about you that you feel you are confident and safe saying on a podcast that is being recorded?
I am not nearly as smart as other people think I am, and I'm not nearly as funny as I think I am. So that's probably exactly how my family would describe me, and my friends. That's a good one. Yeah.
I don't know. I laugh with you quite a bit when we hang out. So I will say you're doing okay. What are some like hobbies or interests that take your time when you are not writing papers or doing research?
Well, I don't really have a lot of hobbies, and that's actually a problem. My wife's been telling me about that. So she made me start running with her, and couples that run together usually only do so because one is willing to suffer to spend time with his wife. So we just ran a half marathon together. That's really fun to do during the summer here in Chicagoland. This place is a runner's paradise. There's no hills or anything like that. Beautiful places to get out and enjoy nature.
Did you do the Chicago Marathon?
No, we did the half in the Fox Valley Marathon.
Fox Valley.
So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well done. Half
Way to go,
marathon's
you.
quite an achievement in itself.
Yeah, and if you've done 2 half marathons, you can say you've done a full marathon. So that's
No,
basically
you can't.
that's what I tell people.
Okay,
No.
more BS. Michael's
6
just going
months
to just
apart,
call you
doesn't
on all
matter.
of
Yeah.
them.
I'm just calling
he
it.
ran one
I'll call
last
that
year.
one.
That's hilarious. Okay,
No,
Michael,
I've done 2 half marathons, and I would never say that I've run a marathon because
You're missing out, Michael.
Yeah,
I guess. I don't know.
no.
just for the bragging points. That's
Just for the
Yes.
bragging.
Okay, Michael, why do we have the joy of Wes with us today other than hearing about the running joys of Chicago?
Yeah, well, obviously not for his sense of humor.
Okay. Okay.
But,
All right, just undercut him right away.
No, you know what? To be honest, I think he's on here because he is smart, even though he's not acknowledging that. I mean, Wes is probably, at least in the circles where I run, is one of the brightest young missiologists I know. And I think his thinking surrounding movements is incredibly important and timely for us right now. And I mean, for that reason, I enjoy hanging out with Wes when we have opportunity, which we've had a lot of opportunity over the past couple of weeks. We were together at the Global Alliance for Church Multiplication, and then at the Evangelical Missiological Society. So we've had some good time to hang out and to think
More
about these
geeky,
things.
nerdy academic things.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's one of the reasons. And secondly, Wes has been the facilitator of the Motus Dei network, and that's where I think you and I first got connected. Actually, I don't know. Somehow we got connected.
Craig
I don't even remember. Was it through Craig? Okay. Yeah, so Wes facilitates this network. It's a global network of the practitioners and scholars who are looking seriously at movements around the world. And I love the fact when Wes talks about this, he talks about this as being really a way that he was hoping to crowdsource his dissertation. And I think it's turned into something else, hasn't it? Something
Yes.
probably beyond what you expected, but it's been a great network to be a part of, and there's some good thinking going on in that network, and I'm just so grateful for Wes and what he's been doing in the whole area of movements, and how he is not just simply a champion of movements, but really a critic in the good sense of the word. Wes, in my mind, represents somebody who is going to do due diligence on movements, and that's going to come out in this dissertation that he's been working on for a little bit. So hurry up and get that thing written.
Yes.
Okay.
One more year.
Lord willing. One more year. Wes, here's my question for you as we begin to kind of talk about some of the things that you are seeing and observing. I want to go back, I think, to maybe square one for all of our listeners and for us so that we're talking on common terms. What's a movement?
Yeah, that's okay. Well, why don't you start with the hard question, Andrew? Okay, so I would describe a movement as basically a chain reaction of disciples making disciples, where that eventually churches emerge in that process, and that churches start reproducing themselves as well. And so a movement, you start to see a movement quantitatively defined as 4 generations of multiplication in multiple streams within a relatively short time frame.
Okay. So when there are 4 generations with multiple streams, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if the church is a family, well, families don't just get bigger, right? Families reproduce along generational lines. And so when you have a church that starts another church, that would be the 2nd generation. And if that starts another church, the 3rd, and so on. And there's movements that have been running now for a couple decades in the majority world where they're tracking more than 25 generations of multiplication. So we're trying to learn from that type of phenomenon, because it's a sustainable way to see peoples and communities transformed by Jesus.
You made reference to a word that I think is important here, that we're observing this as a phenomena. And I think that's so important for us to understand, because the temptation for us, even within the movement conversation, is to look at these movements and then begin to pull out methodologies and say, if you do this, this, and this, and this, then you're going to get to a movement. But really what we're observing around the world is just that. These are observations. It's phenomenological. And yes, there are some phenomena that we can see when they're repeated in a sociological sense, that it's going to produce this kind of momentum that results in reproduction and multiplication and these sorts of things. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, there is a sense where the first really solid, robust treatment of movements was David Garrison in his booklet in 1999 called Church Planting Movements, where he said what we're trying to do here is kind of reverse engineer what's happened to see how that informs our own approach to seeing the kingdom break into a unreached context. And so different methodologies have kind of spun off from that. But I think to your point about being really overly focused on methodology, there is a sense of that. But I think that was kind of in the early stages of this whole conversation around movements. Now I think we're at a place where we're really looking at movements through the lens of innovation. And every time you see a movement occur in a context, that it is an innovation, that there was a lot of failure and learning from failure and restarting again. And I think as evangelicals, we typically don't really think very well through the lens of innovation. We just like...
No, just duplication.
Yeah, duplication. What does the Bible say? And I'm going to do it. And there's something actually really important about that impulse. But I think the Bible actually tells us that that we need to experiment. We need to try new things, and that we need to be adaptive. So,
Wes, do you feel like that could be potentially more a Western way of thinking? Because I think what you're articulating is a form of movement that many of us are actually a bit foreign to. And I say that because we're used to movements as being more social based. And they tend to maybe be a generation, if you think about it, for time, period, place. Sometimes they have a defined leader. Sometimes they, maybe multiple leaders. And then that movement either continues in some sort of form, or maybe plateaus, or maybe even kind of dies out. Kind of speak to like how you described a movement is something that, if it is truly generational, may see. I mean, we could potentially 20, 60, 80 years down the road. I mean, you could potentially generationally replicative wise, you can maybe see it faster, but speak to how maybe we are thinking of how us in the West tend to think about movements differently from what maybe you just described, or maybe they're more similar.
wow. In terms of, the lifespan of movements, I mean, Andrew Walls says that church history is serial, not progressive. And so every movement kind of rises and falls. I mean, so we do want to make sure that what we're seeing happen is sustainable, but we understand that there are so many examples through church history and even contemporary examples where a movement kind of plateaus and then starts to decline. And then certain things happen in the decline phase where you really start to restart again and go back to that apostolic environment of catalyzing movement. In terms of generational, or in terms of how we tend to look at it in the West, I mean, we're really good at looking at the movement's discourse from a management perspective, where we just want to abstract these common factors, and that where we can kind of say, okay, well, these are the universal characteristics, and therefore we want to apply these factors everywhere across every single context to try to start movements. Whereas actually, when you really look at how movements talk about it, it's really just so tangible. It's not abstract, and it's not like they're following some sort of blueprint. They had to make it up as they went along, and so it's really it's embodied in the context, and it's really at the end of the day too. This is where I'm kind of stuck in my own wicked problem is. Sometimes I think we're way too focused on methodology and on methods and practice, but the strength of movements is a really robust praxology. And so I'm kind of living in the midst of that tension myself.
So, hey, so you're jogging my mind towards a question is, and again, talking about what things we do here in the West, are movements intentionally started? Or are movements naturally occurring and we just get to observe them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Andrew. From my experience, so, Motus Dei for me, and Michael alluded to this at the beginning of the recording here, was I started Motus Dei really to kind of crowdsource my own research. I wanted to rub shoulders with other researchers so that I can learn as much as I can as I'm working on my own PhD on the topic. And suddenly, though, when we published the book and my name was on the front, everyone started to look to me as the expert. So I'm not like leading the network through any sort of expertise, but really just as a learner. So I would say so I'm not like a spokesperson for movements or anything like that. And I don't want the listeners to think that I am. In my experience with movements,
has been noted. You're good.
yeah. But okay. But in terms of your question, I would say there's almost always there's a really intentional effort to see a movement happen. Like there's this one catalyst, and I'll just in East Africa, he says he asks himself this question multiple times every day. He says, "Is what I'm doing right now easily reproducible at the same quality without my involvement?" And if he can't answer that in the affirmative, then he finds another way to do it. So there is something that's just fundamentally different from just a simple church plant. Like we're about church planting, or we're gonna do this missional initiative here in this context. When you're actually starting a movement, you have to be really intentional about distributing authority and about equipping and releasing people and building structure as you go along, rather than kind of thinking around our institutional framework. Does that make sense?
Unfortunately, it makes tons of sense, and my brain is breaking. So,
yeah, let me just speak a moment to the sociological phenomena that is happening in movements, because what and this is something, I mean, this goes back to my graduate studies and looking at new religious movements. There is something spontaneous about some movements that just occur. And it often occurs when there is some dynamic leader that can communicate a vision, and that a part of that vision is confronting something in culture, that people have I don't know, an inert sense that something's wrong, and whatever this person's communicating is going to make it right. And out of that grassroots initiative, a movement grows. And I think, Matt, in some ways, this is what these social movements often do. But that also occurs in new religious movements as well. But the phenomena in Christianity and movements has some similarities with the sociological ideas that I think Rodney Stark articulated so nicely in an article years and years ago, as he was making observations about the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. That we also see in Christianity, in these movements, as they're applying similar principles. Movements often take strong, charismatic, dynamic, apostolic, we would say, in the Christian movement, leaders who can communicate a vision and inspire people to move in a direction. And so I wonder at times if we really back up in looking at these movements and get to the very beginnings, if we wouldn't revise a little bit of what we say and seed some of the spontaneity there, rather than the orchestration and so on. Because there's a factor in Christianity that we certainly do not see in new religious movements or in social movements, and that's the move of the Holy Spirit at work in people's lives. And his movement, is often described as spontaneous, unexpected, magnificent, miraculous, and so forth. It's out of control. It's out of our control, certainly. And that factors into some of the things that we observe phenomenologically about movements around the world, Christian movements, church planting movements, that is.
Yeah. And it's almost always like really impossible to forecast when the tipping point is going to be. So, tipping points, you discover them only really in hindsight. So, so I guess there is this, you want to be able to structure yourself to see the spontaneous multiplication happening. Whereas oftentimes in our own kind of traditional church paradigm, we tend to kind of be in the way of that. I think our faith is actually movemental by nature. And as Alan Hirsch says, we have the latent capacity for movement built within us, right? In the seed, you have the tree, in the tree, you have the forest. So it's there, and that's the whole logic of the seed is multiplication. So I think we move that way, but it just tends to get buried by our traditions. Tradition's not bad. Traditionalism's not bad. Institutions aren't bad. Institutionalism is what's bad. Leaders aren't bad, but leaderism or clericalism, that's what you got to watch out for. So if we're not really intentional about the paradigm that we have in our understanding of church, then we just easily get stuck into replicating these institutional forms that can oftentimes, I think, we can do more to stop movements than actually to start them.
It also seems like our impulses and reactionary impulses and um maybe a desire to be more influential or even just impatient, right? Like we're seeing change is occurring. So let's create the next thing. Let's kind of follow the way of the next wave of whatever's happening within the society. And let's just kind of catch that, run with it and see where it goes. I feel like the church, even in its institutional form, if anything, it's the larger institutional forms that have sustained or helped sustain the overall global Christian movement, for like longevity wise. And it's almost been the smaller upstarts that have actually kind of like launched and died, or Peter, kind of like went kind of to the wayside. And I almost kind of wonder, like, that's an interesting, when you start kind of thinking about generatively, right? And you think about long term, there's something really unique about that. And but there is something about that innovation aspect where it's like the smaller ones tend to want to innovate more, right? That actually may tend to, and Michael, you wrote a lot about this in the Ephesiology book, is like sometimes it's those outside innovators that kind of come into the institution that actually they can kind of like grab hold of and kind of learn from a little bit. But yeah, this is a fascinating conversation because you just think about, like, you were talking about movement and church movements, and sometimes almost the way you framed it is like, that's actually a bit of a foreign concept when I hear the word movement these days, especially because we're hearing it in more social and political contexts. So I think grounding it in kind of that, church history, missiological context is actually, maybe it's fresh and different and I think helpful for us as we're, continuing down this dialogue. So
That's a good way to put it, Matt. It's not, the paradigm shift is not from institutional to movement. It's from, we do one thing, or church is one static expression to city. And so we need the institutional church. It has that long-term memory, and strength and stability. But we also need to learn to be a lot more agile and mobile and adaptive in what we're doing. And I think that we have a lot to learn from that. If Jesus was starting a movement in an unreached context, well, that's very similar to these movements that are happening among Muslims and Hindus right now. The context is so similar that I heard this quote, and let me, at the Evangelical Missiological Society, and I've kind of adapted it to my own research. If mission is the mother of theology, then church planting movements can be thought of as a midwife for ecclesial reform. And so I think we're in this place in the West right now. Just thinking of North America, we've lost 40 million members in the church in the last 25 years at the exact same time that the missional conversation was going on. 15,000 churches in America shut their doors every year. And so the growth of the mega church movement in America is actually a lagging indicator of our decline. So we're still like thinking through, well, what are we going to do? Well, we just need to do more of the same. And we really need to learn from these Muslims who have come to faith in Jesus and how they're doing church. I think that would be such a humble thing for the church in America to do, that is really, I think, we're going to spend the next 20 years really thinking about that.
Can you, not for the next 20 years, but for the next few minutes, articulate that a little bit more for our listeners? And I'll just be the stand-in listener for me, because all the things that you are stating if I'm pulling on the thread, and there was a little shrapnel that some people just got hit with by saying, we focused on mission, we focused on a missional movement. We as the church said we need to be on mission. Simultaneously, everything around us on a church structure, it's falling apart. So we said we need to reform, and while trying to reform, it's all dying. It's all actually going worse while we are saying, let's bring newness. And you said, let's stop chasing our tails in one direction. Let's listen and learn to our formerly Muslim brothers and sisters. What are some of the things that you are seeing as you are observing what's happening there?
Yeah. So let me be very brief, Andrew. The first would be really that churches are simple. Okay. Number two, that they're adaptive, that they don't just take one shape, that you build it as you need it, kind of a thing. You're not starting with a certain structure, and that churches are embedded in their context, so that you're not like extracting people from where they are, but you're actually taking forms of church to people. But it's not like, let me just say, church isn't just something you do; it's an identity. And so the churches in these movements, they emerge after a process of disciple making. So it's not like they're planted; they emerge. And then that oftentimes too, just simply because of their sociology, if you're in a place of persecution, you don't have opportunities for seminary education, which I think is important. And you can't, you don't have money to rent large meeting halls. Well, you're going to be in a house, and okay, we got too many people coming to your house church, so okay, let's start meeting in this house church. And so you have some structural things in those contexts that have the built-in architecture for multiplication within it. So I think, to summarize all that, it would be this quote that I take from Neil Cole all the time. He said, in movements, the point is to lower the bar for how we do church so that anyone can do it, and raise the bar for what it means to be a disciple so that they will do it. Right? So that it's the focus is not on let's just get to church as soon as possible. No, the focus is on Jesus and making disciples of Jesus who are impacting others with the kingdom. And then the church is assigned foretaste and instrument of that mission. So the church kind of comes downstream in that process. And I'll stop.
It's a really deep and wide kind of approach there that I feel like sometimes we just kind of go for the wide, right? Or we get stuck in going deep, but we kind of, again, we forget that we have to go wide as well. So kind of find that balance, it sounds like.
Yeah, this is good. And there's so much more that we could spend time in unpacking. But I want to shift our conversation a bit, because, Wes, you've been a part of facilitating the Motus Dei network, and the Motus Dei network recently crafted a document called Reactivating the Church as Movement, as a call to the global church to think differently about the things that we're doing. Tell us a little bit about that. Why was this important? What's the background of it? What's the hope for it?
Yes, and Michael was being humble. Michael, you are one of the principal authors of this, so you should be able to tell the story of the statement just as much as I can. But as you know, with the Motus Dei network, one of the first outputs of our network was the book by that title, Motus Dei, The Movement of God to Disciple the Nations. Now, that was 4 years ago, and we were sensing a need for the network. We have over 300 members now, to kind of gather together. And the next thing that we can really do to build on our collective intelligence, right, to learn from each other, is bring together diverse movement thinkers, because there's kind of these silos of movement thinking in the world, to bring everyone together. So we had this face-to-face symposium in Cyprus in May. And before that, we convened a team of 9 principal authors to kind of write a statement. When we say movement, what do we mean? And I was thinking of something very short and kind of concise that really speaks to this idea of paradigm, like this. What is a movement paradigm? If you're going to say, I'm into movements, well, what do you mean exactly? And how can we have a lot of people giving input into that? So that was where the first kind of draft came out. And then what we did is we opened it up to the network, and then they gave us a bunch of feedback, and then we integrated some of the best suggestions. And then we met in Cyprus face to face, and we had 2 more rounds of sessions there working on the statement. And then later this summer, we produced a final version. So in all, we had over 100 people give input into this statement, which we ended up calling Reactivating the Church's Movement. So I sent it out. We sent it out to a lot of people. One person said to me, he said, "Wes, this is like the Lausanne Covenant, except for movements." And I was, oh, yeah, that's exactly what it is. What we had originally thought would just be like this really concise kind of statement of what movements is, like in a propositional form, turned out to be something really holistic and a lot broader in nature, and kind of maybe took some of the teeth out of it, so to speak. But if you're really leaning into, I mean, it's still a prophetic statement. There is some teeth in it, but if we're really leaning into collective intelligence, well, then that's kind of it turned out to be what it is. And so we're hoping that it's a prophetic statement to the church, to really kind of say to challenge the church to think outside of the institutional framework. And I will say this. It is kind of like the Lausanne Covenant, except for movements, although I do know now why John Stott wrote the Lausanne Covenant by himself.
Yeah, well, the whole history of that was is interesting, and his interaction with Billy Graham and so on. But yeah, good. Well, why is this important, Wes?
Yeah, I mean, we want to speak to the church. We're in this liminal stage right now in the history of the world. Everybody's talking about it all the time, and even starting with Bosch, and then even with Garrison's research, the shaping of things to come. Tom Steffen wrote The Facilitator Era. Everyone was kind of, even Ralph Winter was like proposing there's a 4th era of missions, and then he was persuaded against publishing that because they had the Perspectives course going on. I mean, everyone's talking about we're in the midst of this kind of paradigm shift, and I kind of think we're maybe 25 years into a 50-year paradigm shift. And it is, again, it's from the institutional to diversity, and movements are kind of a part of that. And so we're really kind of wanting to give the global church just a document to really think through and to be challenged. How can we learn from what God is doing in these movements right now?
Mm.
Wes, I'm looking at the document and I'm interested. Could you expound on like number 7? It's integrating the Motus Dei with the Missio Dei. And I think for years we've heard a lot about Missio, but why don't you kind of expound upon on both of them and how these two you see them coming together?
So Michael and I have just had a conversation about this, so I'll try not to jump in the middle. Missio Dei, I think, came out in the 1940s or 50s. It was just kind of as a way to say, God is missional by nature, therefore the church is missional by nature, and recognizing that mission is God's endeavor that we join. It's not just a task that's given to the church. And when you do that, I think that solves a lot of problems. However, that term missional didn't come into the evangelical dictionary until the 1990s. And, everyone's missional now. And I think the missional conversation really kind of evolved into like a movement of good works or a healing movement in a community. Like you used to have Baptists, now you have missional Baptists. You used to have Anglicans, now you have missional Anglicans. And it is nice to talk about it, but honestly, if everything's missional, it's really hard to say, well, what do you mean? So
right.
I was intentionally trying to say, we coined this term in 2018. What if God's not just sent in his nature or missional by nature, but that God is movement in his nature? And then there's this whole concept that Michael's written a lot on, Michael's the expert on this, of perichoresis, this mutual indwelling of the persons of the Trinity, that they face each other in this other-centered posture of self-giving love. And so the idea for church's movement has to flow from a theology of God as movement. So Motus Dei is trying to give a new meta concept to hang our hats on. And actually, I think Motus Dei really makes everything more dynamic. If you're thinking like, okay, God is movement by nature, therefore we are movement by nature, then that unlocks a lot of things. Like God is not just present, he's presencing, he's always he's moving, he's making himself more known. And so that means I'm going to be drawn into deeper devotion. At the same time, I'm also going to be drawn into deeper mission, because Jesus is always presencing and he's also going. And I need to be a part of both of those things. So it kind of brings together devotion and movement for me. But there, Michael's probably got I think a lot to say writing on perichoresis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm excited about this because I think this is a missiological and I think even a theological paradigm shift for us. And I think it's something that's so important for us to get our heads around, as challenging as it is to attempt to circumscribe God, which we're not trying to do. We're trying, more than anything, describe phenomena that we see in theological and missiological language. And that is this whole idea that Wes is referring to of God's eternal. I mean, this is what is so powerful about this. The eternal God is eternally sending himself in relationship to Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but also in relationship to the world he created. And that sending of himself is a deliberate movement to people. And so we have this eternal God who is always, always moving to people. He's making that missional move to them. And I think this is just so important for us as a church today to understand, because so often we do the opposite. We're expecting people to make the missional move to us. This was the attractional model that is still lingering around in various forms, where we're saying, you know what, invite people to this Sunday, the event, and to bring them in so they can hear the gospel and so on. And that is just not the nature of the body of Christ. I mean, I'm getting a little bit excited here. When you think about Jesus, who is the ultimate, not only ultimate in the sense of the one being sent and incarnating here, but moving to people as he does, as we read throughout the Gospels, he's never in one place. He's on a mountainside. He's in a boat on the water. He's in villages. He's in synagogues. He's in the temple. He's always making that missional move to people. And if we today understand the ecclesia as the body of Christ, then what he did tells us something about the ontological nature of the ecclesia. We are to be the same. We're to make the missional move to people. And so ecclesia can happen on a boat, on a mountainside, under a tree, in a village, in wherever. And in that sense, it becomes adaptive, because that's who Christ is. He adapted in his incarnation. And that's the expectation of the body of Christ, to do like Jesus did. Anyway,
okay. I have two of the authors here with me on the podcast, so I'm very happy to ask them this. Michael, what if somebody is listening, or Michael and Wes, somebody who is so steeped in the missional movement of things, and I'm talking about the previous era, right? When we're talking about, being missional and that sort of thing. What if they just heard what you said and they're like, but that's what being quote unquote on mission is. It isn't an attractional thing. It is it is a going, it is a moving, it is a verb. We are on mission. We are moving towards people. How would you then differentiate what you're talking about of this shift from Missio Dei to Motus Dei?
I want Wes to respond to this, but just very quickly, in my mind, we're not making a shift from one to the other. I think they go together. The eternally sent God is eternally sent. That's the verb form of Missio Dei in Latin, the sending of God. The Motus Dei is getting us more to the idea of where his sentness is going. He's making that move, the moving God toward people. So I think there's still value in both Missio Dei and Motus Dei. But Wes,
Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't set you up to say.
Yeah, I mean, the Missio Dei conversation would be still a bit reductionistic. So modus is the modal language is trying to say it's not just God is sent or crossing boundaries. I mean, that is definitely that's where the apostolic idea comes from. But then in the midst of that, there's something about this constant dynamic energy and activity of redeeming and sustaining and creating and multiplying that we tap into that. So they're meant to go together.
One of the things that I'm also hearing in this conversation, and maybe you guys can expound on a little bit more, but something we talk about at Telos here is also this idea of overlapping movements and supporting overlapping movements. And so I wonder if you could speak to like the plurality of movements and how that kind of functions in all of this as well too. Only because my thought is there are if there are movements happening around the world, how does we continue, especially in the West, we continue to have a bit of a problem with unifying with others, collaborating with others, and so the question is are we just trying to kind of come up with new terminology for the sake of terminology, or do we actually see maybe God kind of moving the church and his church into maybe a potentially more unified vision for the future globally? And if so, then doesn't that suggest that then there must be some sort of overlapping of movements among the church? Maybe Wes, you could respond to that.
I mean, I think you just answered your question, Matt. You said it really well, actually. There is a sense too that all of our theology is going to be wrong somehow because we're really just trying to approximate reality. And so, with the Missio Dei conversation, that was helpful at its time. It feels like it's run its course. So now enter Motus Dei. And this is the nature of us trying to explain what we're experiencing and give language that really edifies the church and honors God at the same time. So yeah, overlapping movements in different places we all need each other. I mean, we need to not prioritize one type of expression of the church over the other. I think we need to fight for unity.
Yeah, and I think that's key, what you just said, Wes, that we don't need to prioritize one expression of the church over the other, and I think that's where the challenge, I think, lies today. We talk a lot about the catalytic, analytic, and cathartic nature of the ecclesia, and you recall last week we had Ralph Corner on giving us I think, a very robust, rich definition of ecclesia as well. And I think that's where we have to get to the place where we can come and say, this is what ecclesia is. I don't know that the church in theological language has any meaning anymore. That is worth holding on to. I think we have to return to ecclesia and really understand that in the whole idea of God's working in the world and this perichoretic the nature characteristic of Him working together and yet distinct, preserving the unity of the one and yet recognizing the diversity of the work, and us being invited into that as His body. Then what that seems to indicate is that there are all sorts of modalities of the ecclesia, if not even sodalities, and they have to each be thought of in terms of, these are the people of God. And that, I think that has to be where we end up in this whole conversation. At least that's part of my hope, as we're realizing that God is far bigger than the word church and how it's been defined.
That's well said.
It seems as if, that would require a level of humility
Absolutely.
amongst the people of God in order to achieve. And sometimes like you could look at that and go, oh my gosh, this is so pie in the sky. That'll never happen. But I think in West, you were saying this about referring to this liminal space in which we currently exist. Change is occurring. And with change comes the old and the new. New wine requires a new wineskin. And while we are not looking to maybe modify the the specific systems themselves, although some systemic changes will have to occur and institutional changes will have to occur, we're talking about the whole, right? We're looking at this so holistically. We're embracing the holistic movement of God that says, if this is going to mean anything in the future of the human race, if this thing we call, Christianity and this Bible has any sort of intrinsic, transcendent value to us, it must include the whole. And I feel like the world is waiting on that answer.
Yeah, the metaphor that I like to use is the immortal jellyfish. It's a majestic organism, the only one in the world that when it finds itself needing to adapt in order to survive, it's able to go through a reverse metamorphosis, revert back to a larva state, and then fall back to the ocean floor and reproduce again in a polyp colony that then grows up into more adult jellyfish. So hence the word immortal jellyfish, because it's able to live forever. And it's actually one networked organism, all with the same DNA. And so it has to be healthy, and it has to be healthy in every single phase of that whole process. The beautiful thing is it really, though, comes back to a more simple state in order to multiply, in order to survive. And I think that's really instructive for us because, and we have to recognize that whole metaphor is important. Every single phase of that jellyfish is important. Sometimes, you get people in the movements conversation, they're like, movements is the only thing God is doing. I mean, they wouldn't say that like explicitly, but sometimes it comes across that way. So there needs to be more humility there. But also in terms of like evolutionary theory, after Darwin came about this idea of social Darwinism, where certain races thought they were more evolved than other races, which was obviously by definition racist and horrible. Well, to extend that conversation, sometimes you get to ecclesial Darwinism, where like an institutional church they'll look at like what they'll call a primitive form, and they'll say, "Oh, it's okay. They're just babies. They'll get to where we're at eventually." And I think, and Michael said this to me when I was sharing last time I shared this metaphor, was that actually what the New Testament presents, the so-called primitive ecclesiology, is actually a very robust ecclesiology, and there's so much that we have to humble ourselves to learn from these types of movements, like with poor Muslims who are coming to faith in Jesus and how they're doing their church. It's just radical, and it's really inspiring. It's not perfect, right? Nobody's saying that it's the best model, but I think it's highly instructive for where we find ourselves in the West right now.
That's good.
Man, as somebody who is a practitioner, as we all are, but in my specific role in helping lead a church congregation, these are the type of conversations that make me, like I say, it breaks my brain just a little bit, in that how do we, you talk about the value of different places along, I don't want to say along the line again, because if I say along the line, it gives the impression that there is a more mature, a should be this way form of church, and then or the Ecclesia, and then again the air quote primitive form. Even calling it primitive still sounds like a derogatory sort of thing. And so if we are, wherever we are, a part of whatever network or denomination or things, those confessional things hold us together. These are the things we believe. And yet, even as I listen to you, it's like, oh man, how do you get to say these are the things we believe and hold on to them, but not hold on to them too tightly so that we lose control by saying it has to look like this. This is the most important thing. How are you able to say this is what we are pursuing, but this is what we are pursuing in our context with these people, but we're not also casting shade at anybody else who doesn't hold to these things. Like, I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth in a way as I'm wrestling with these things. Do I sound crazy by saying I'm wrestling with that?
There's so much competitiveness that we've inherited, especially American evangelicalism, got to be so big that people started to define themselves based on what they're not. And that's, you know, a negative identity. And some ministries that are out there, like, they kind of lead with a negative identity. And,
Right.
you know, so I think a mature way to look at it is just to describe from a rigorous biblical theology of why you are pursuing the type of ministry that you're doing without like throwing other people under the bus.
And that is so huge. Obviously, that's kind of like the definition of humility. That you're going to look at others and say you're more important than I am. I'm going to lift you up. I am lower. And so sometimes, you know, what do you say you are for? How deeply do you believe those things that you are for? And then are you able to say we are so for these things because we are rooted in Scripture and we see these things? But if you are about something else, I am just going to be fully for you, continuing to pursue that thing and not making you have to believe like me for me to say, yes, we are on the same team. And I think this whole idea, Matt, that you were bringing up, Wes, that you were touching on, like this collaborative nature that we want to be a part of as the Ecclesia towards movements, that is that messiness, is when those come together and we say, this is what I'm for, you are for some different things, but we are about the biggest and the most important thing, which means, yes, we should absolutely continue to work and collaborate together and move towards the ends of seeing God's glory saturated in all the earth, and not about my own brand or camp.
Build a bigger tent. Keep building the tent. Let it go larger, right? Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say, Andrew?
Yeah, I think maybe build a bigger tent, or realize that you've always been in a bigger tent and stop complaining about the small size of your tent.
There you go.
So,
well,
I got
think
an eyebrow raise.
Yeah,
So,
no,
yes,
I think
Michael.
you're right. I think you're right. We need to come to the place that we understand that ecclesia is who we are. It's not something that we go to. It's not something that we do. It's not, I mean, you might even go as far as to say it's not actually something that you plant. It is who we are. It's our identity as the body of Christ. We are collectively, and in a real sense, ontologically, the ecclesia. And I think that should automatically get us to think that, wow, this is huge. This is beyond my denominational ties and traditions. This is huge. And that's what, Wes, that's what you've been saying, at least what I've been hearing the past couple of weeks that we've been together. Christianity is the largest movement, sustained movement in the history of the world. And but we need to realize that it's just not our little piece where we are in our community, but this is far greater. And then to actually act like that we're a part of all of this. This is us. Sounds like a TV show or something.
I was going to say you could even turn it a little bit, Michael, and like just really be slightly mean. You're a Christian, act like it, right? But not mean. We are the Ecclesia. Wes, thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing us to a place where we are digging into these things in a deeper way, where we are actually trying to get under the surface and say, okay, so what does this really mean for us? If people have been excited by what they have heard today, or some of the thoughts and the challenges, how can they follow up with your work?
Yeah, I would say just go to motusdei.network, click on Reactivating the Church's Movement, and share that with friends, family, colleagues, and have discussions around it. We also have a companion guide following me personally, you can go to my academia page. Is under Warwick Farah. You guys put link to these things in the show notes.
We absolutely will.
So those two ways to follow up would be great. And I would encourage you to look at Motus Dei. We also have an abridged version that just recently came out called God on the Move. That's, I think, $7 on Kindle. So for a Starbucks cappuccino, you can get a nice
wow, those
book.
are $7.
Yeah, it's getting bad out there. So those are 3 ways, I think, Andrew.
The struggle is real.
That's great. Thank you, Wes. Also, thank you for answering the question on whether you were an academic or not by sending people to your academia page.
Yeah.
So we'll just let that rest.
I'm humble enough to say you win. You win.
Gosh, Wes, it has been so good to have you on the pod. I really do look forward to the next excuse that we have to grill you, to laugh with you because you are funny, and to enjoy your presence. Thank you, listeners, for also joining us today with this conversation. I do hope that you were able to keep up. I hope that you were able to get excited about certain things. If you felt lost at any point, please keep listening. We really do invite you to go and read that paper, that statement, mine it, share it, talk about it with others, but keep digging into with what we have available in the ecclesiological space. Go and check out our podcast or other podcasts rather that we have had. If anything interests you, dig in. And then go to masterclasses.ecclesiology.com to continue to say, all right, there is something here. This is exciting, but I want to learn more. I want to know more. We invite you to learn more. This is really what we have set up in that space. So for Matt, for Michael, for Wes, and myself, thank you for joining us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.